There's an urban legend called the final kiss, and it goes like this. A subway or a railroad worker doesn't want to wake up her husband as she sets off for work, so she leaves this particularly cold morning without her kiss. When she gets to work, she starts completing maintenance on something in between the cars, unbeknownst to her coworkers. She's so focused on what she's doing that she doesn't realize the engine has been started, and she doesn't feel the vibration of the train or notice that the cars are slowly closing in on her until it's too late. First, she feels her legs breaking. Then her torso is crushed and her organs flattened. She's coupled between two cars, completely through her midsection. This doesn't immediately kill her, but others at the scene know that the only way to extract the person is to uncouple the cars. But of course, this would cause the worker to bleed to death, so being that the worker was still conscious, her husband is called and he's told to hurry down to the station. When the husband arrives, he sees the dreaded emergency vehicles and their flashing lights, along with several EMTs and police officers. As he enters the station, suddenly everyone stops and becomes ominously quiet, and they just start to stare at him. He still doesn't understand what's going on, and because he doesn't see his wife, he seeks out her boss, who painfully explains what happened. He takes the man to see his wife, who is now extremely pale. From her chest up, she looks normal, but then the husband notices all of the blood below. He didn't understand why she was still on the track. He thought that they could simply just move the train and he could pull her up. He didn't understand. The train was the only thing that was holding her together. After their final kiss and their last goodbye, the subway workers uncoupled the two cars. The railroad workers uncoupled the two cars, and the bottom half of his wife falls down to the tracks below, and she soon bleeds to death. In another version, the worker is trapped in a shingle crusher, which is a large machine that pulverizes rocks into gravel. And after the husband receives his wife's last or final kiss, the man dies and the crusher is turned back on in order to eject his body. One summer, a girl and her mother moved into the house next door. The girl was obviously new in town and was finding it very hard to adjust. She lived with her mother, and they were very poor because her husband had abandoned them a few years earlier. Eventually, we became friends, and I often visited her house and we would talk. The moment I laid eyes on her, I knew she was the perfect girl for me. Unfortunately, she didn't feel the same way. She was attracted to boys who were handsome and confident, and it was clear that I wasn't her type, so I just decided to wait. She didn't have any friends of her own to talk to, so she would confide in me. Mostly she would just complain about her life, telling me how her mother hit her and how the girls in her class were mean and how they excluded her. She told me about a popular boy that she had a crush on, and she talked about her problems, and I would just sit there and listen. One day she stopped coming to school, and as it turned out, it was because she was being bullied. She told me that one of the popular girls in school had found out that she had a crush on her boyfriend. They began spreading extremely vile rumors about her to their classmates, and they were really making her life a living nightmare. Her behavior soon began to change after she entered junior high. She would stay out all hours of the night, and she began to smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol, and I even heard rumors that she was doing drugs too. She fell in with a bad crowd, and she was even arrested by the police once. Her home life grew even worse, and she would frequently fight with her mother in the middle of the night. Eventually, she dropped out of high school. She stopped speaking to her mother, she became withdrawn, and she would spend days without leaving her room. She would only come out when she needed to use the bathroom or in the middle of the night when her mother was asleep. She would rarely even come out to eat, so her mother would leave food outside of her door. Recently, I went to see her for the first time in a long time, and she refused to come out to see me. Her mother gave me a bowl of soup to take upstairs to her, so I was able to catch a glimpse of her when she opened the door to take it. She was pale, drawn, haggard, and emaciated. She looked like a wet rag that had been wrung out. Soon I was visiting her every day, and after a while she began talking to me through the door. She told me how she was constantly fighting with her mother and how all of her old friends had forgotten about her. She told me how she had fallen in with a bad crowd and how she would go out with them at night, stealing, doing drugs, and getting into trouble. She told me she was caught shoplifting, so now she had a criminal record. She talked about how her mother tried to help her at first, but when she wouldn't listen, her mother flew into a rage and began to hit her. Her life had become unbearable. She wanted to die, and she told me she had tried to take her life many times. But as time went by, her mood gradually began to improve. She even decided to come out of her room. It seemed like things were getting better and the future was looking positive. Her mother was so happy that she broke down in tears and she thanked me profusely. One day, the girl went up to the roof of an apartment building in the neighborhood and she jumped off. The building wasn't very high and she just landed in some shrubbery. That is what probably saved her life. However, her spinal cord was injured in the fall and she was paralyzed from the neck down. The doctors said that she would spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. When she got out of the hospital, I went to see her. She was lying in her bed, unable to move. She said she wished that she didn't survive the fall and told me that she was sorry for all of the trouble she had caused me and her mother. I tried to soothe her and stop her crying, but it was hard to comfort someone when they're lying down. She was weeping so much that her whole body was shaking. She couldn't even wipe away her own tears. As I held her in my arms, I asked her to marry me. She was like, "Really? Are you serious? Me?" She couldn't believe that anyone would want her. I had to propose to her several times before she would believe I really meant it. She cried so hard that her tears ran dry. I tried to reassure her and told her I had always wanted to marry her because I had always loved her. She was the perfect girl for me. She always had been, even when she ignored me and didn't return my feelings, even when she was hanging out with a bad crowd, even when I had to listen to all of her stupid problems, even when she became so thin and was hiding in her room, even when I told the popular girl she had a crush on her boyfriend, even when I was spreading vile rumors about her to her classmates, even when I sprayed graffiti all over her house, even when I killed her cat and put it through the mail slot of her house, even now that she's lying there in her bed, small, weak, and unable to move, even now I still love her. You see, she's the perfect girl for me. Soon, we will be married. There was a young girl who lived in Texas. She was excited because it was the night of the high school dance, and she had brought a brand new dress for the occasion, and she was sure she was going to look beautiful in it. She wanted the dance to be the best evening of her life. Then her mother came into the house looking angry. "You're not going to that dance," her mother said. "But why?" she asked her mother. "I've just been talking to the preacher. He says the dance is going to be for the devil, and you're absolutely forbidden to go." The girl nodded as if she accepted her mother's words, but she was determined to go to that dance. As soon as her mother was busy, she put on her brand new dress and she sneaked out of the house and ran to her high school. As soon as she walked in, all of the boys turned to look at her, and she was startled by all of the attention. Normally, no one noticed her. Her mother sometimes accused her of being too awkward to get a boyfriend, but she was not awkward that night. The boys in her class were fighting with each other to dance with her. Later, she broke away from the crowd and went to the table to get some punch to drink. She heard a sudden hush. The music just stopped. When she turned around, she saw a handsome young man in an expensive suit with jet black hair that was slicked back. He was standing right next to her.
"Will you dance with me?"
The girl managed to stammer out a yes, and he took her out on the dance floor. The music immediately started back, and she found herself dancing better than she had ever danced before. They were now the center of attention. He started to spin her around really fast, so she grasped for air as she was trying to step out of the spin, but he would just spin her faster and faster. Her feet began to feel really hot, and the floor seemed to melt underneath her. When she looked down, she noticed that the young man wasn't wearing any shoes, and instead of feet, he had black hooves. He continued to spin her around even faster, and she was spinning so fast that a cloud of dust flew up around them both so that they were hidden from the crowd. When the dust settled, she was gone. The man in black bowed once to the crowd and then disappeared. The devil had come to his party, and he had spun the girl all the way to hell. A few years ago, a young man and his new bride went to Paris for their honeymoon. While the happy couple was wandering around the city taking in the sights, they decided to do some shopping. The wife went to a trendy clothes shop and she tried on several dresses while the husband waited outside of the dressing room. After time passed and the wife didn't come out, the husband began to wonder what was taking her so long. He asked one of the female sales assistants to go into the dressing room and tell his wife to hurry up. The assistant came out and said that his wife wasn't in there. In disbelief, he checked it himself and found the dressing room to be completely empty. They searched the entire shop, but they didn't find her. The husband thought that his wife must have been playing a practical joke on him, so he returned to their hotel and he waited up for her, but she never showed up. As the hours passed, he became more and more anxious, and when she didn't return the next morning, he was distraught, so he contacted the police. Within 48 hours, all of the Parisian authorities were looking for the missing American bride. They issued a description of her to radio stations and TV news channels, and she was described as a tall American woman, 24 years old, with a birthmark on her left cheek. It seemed as if everyone in Paris was on the lookout for the missing woman, but to no avail. Nobody had seen her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The police did what they could, but after 3 weeks, they gave up on their search. The husband began to suspect that his wife had second thoughts about their marriage and she must have just simply run away and left him. 6 months later, exhausted and depressed, he finally left Paris and returned to the United States. As the months turned into years, the man had given up on finding his wife, but his life had totally fallen apart. He was so filled with grief that he was unable to hold a job or go on with his life. He took to wandering aimlessly from place to place, country to country, letting fate take him where it may. And 2 years later, he found himself in the Philippines during a carnival. He stopped in front of a freak show in a shabby old tent. The sign above the entrance read, "The House of Oddities." Curious, he decided to enter and he was disgusted by what he saw. Crouched in cages, he saw a collection of hideously deformed freaks. They were hideously deformed people. They were terrifying examples of human misery. In the last filthy cage, he was horrified to see the featured attraction. A twisted, scarred, and mutilated woman was rocking back and forth and groaning like an animal. The sign on her cage read, "The Worm Woman." She didn't have any arms or legs because they had been hacked off, leaving her with just a head and a torso. Her face was covered with jagged scars from horrible operations and her mouth was sewn shut. As she turned her sad eyes to look up at him, he screamed as he recognized the birthmark on her face. When I was 13 years old, my parents moved to the city and I started attending a new school. I was very shy at that age and I didn't have any friends, and it took me a while to fit in. The other girls seemed much more mature than I was, and a lot of them seemed to have boyfriends, and I had never even kissed a boy before. I wasn't really used to any kind of male attention at all. Whenever a guy would smile or wink at me, I was either extremely embarrassed or convinced that he was just playing some kind of joke on me. I never thought of myself as beautiful and couldn't believe that any guy would really find me attractive. Then one day, I found a note in my locker. It was a small blue envelope, and it was sealed with a little pink heart sticker. Inside was a piece of paper that read, "I think you're beautiful." I was genuinely touched. It was so sweet and innocent, and I wondered who had sent it, but I didn't really have any idea how to go about finding out. I stuck the love note between the pages of one of my school books, and I began to daydream about my new secret admirer. Could it be the cute boy who let me borrow his pencil in math class? Or was it my lab partner who always made me blush bright red when he smiled at me? Or maybe it was the boy in my history class who shared his book with me when I forgot to bring mine. Regardless, I was as excited as any other teenage girl would be. I was filled with dreams of puppy love, holding hands, and maybe a first kiss. Whenever I was feeling sad, I would take the note out and read it again. It always made me smile. A few days later, I opened my locker and saw another note. It was in a small purple envelope and was sealed with the same little pink heart. Trembling with excitement and anticipation, I carefully peeled it open and unfolded the paper inside. It read, "You're so lovely." For the rest of the night, I held the note to my chest and smiled. Finally, someone really liked me. It made me feel so special that I wanted to scream it from the rooftops. Of course, I was too embarrassed to tell anyone, so I kept it all to myself. A few weeks later, there was another small envelope waiting in my locker. It was sealed with the same pink heart. It read, "I am thinking about you always." As time went on, I couldn't contain my curiosity. I started daydreaming in class and stopped paying attention. One day during history class, I was so busy thinking about my secret admirer that I didn't realize the teacher had even asked me a question. When I snapped back to reality, the teacher turned to the rest of the class and said, "She's not listening to a word I'm saying. She must be in love." They all burst out laughing, and I was so embarrassed I turned bright red. When the next love note appeared in my locker, it read, "You smell like love itself." Huh? I didn't know how to take that. I actually smelled like a combination of shampoo and deodorant. I tucked the note away with the others and I waited eagerly for the next one. I didn't have to wait long because the next morning there was another envelope with the telltale pink heart. It read, "I want to taste you." That was kind of creepy. The next note was even creepier. It read, "I am watching you always." Suddenly having a secret admirer didn't seem like so much fun anymore. He was beginning to sound like a stalker. I didn't know what to do. There wasn't anybody I could talk to about it. As the days went by, my sense of uneasiness began to grow. I started to see those pink heart stickers everywhere. It was beginning to freak me out. In the morning, when my mother drove me to school, there was even one stuck to the windshield of our car. She didn't know where it had come from. Once, when I went to the bathroom at school and I came back out to wash my hands, I noticed a pink heart on the stall door when I looked in the mirror. I knew it wasn't there when I went inside, and I hadn't heard anyone coming to the bathroom while I was in there. It got to the point where I dreaded seeing one of those pink heart stickers. I was a nervous wreck, and things got really bad. One day I came home from school and was horrified to see that a plain white envelope had arrived in the mail. It was sealed with one of those dreaded pink hearts. Now he knew where I lived. With trembling hands, I peeled off the sticker and opened the envelope. Inside there was a picture of a grown man, naked from the waist up. In his right hand, he was holding a knife. There was a note too. It read, "I bet your blood tastes like strawberries." I screamed, but then I noticed something in the photo that filled me with horror. The man had taken a picture of his reflection in the mirror, but he had obscured his face. However, he had forgotten to cover his tracks. Reflected in the mirror was a framed picture that was hanging on the wall behind him. Worst of all, I recognized the man in the framed picture. It was my history teacher.